Hello, everybody. Welcome to the special edition of Psychedelics today. This is an extra episode, and I hope you enjoy it. Today, we talk to Sean McAllister of McAllister Garfield, a law firm in Denver, doing a lot of cannabis law, and he was involved in the Decriminalize Denver campaign a bit. Kevin Matthews and some of the leadership there are surely more involved, but Sean did quite a bit and comes on the show to help us understand a bit better what was going on with Decriminalize Denver, what it means now that psilocybin mushrooms are quote-unquote decriminalized in Denver. And it's a pretty interesting conversation. A lot of people keep yelling, oh, it's legal. It's like, well, no, not really. And the bill is written with some interesting language, so it's worth really knowing about because we don't want people going to jail for doing reckless things. We do want you to be safe out there. So understanding the law is really important. So without further ado, here is our special episode with Sean McAllister on Decriminalize Denver and the Denver Psilocybin Ballot Initiative 301. Thanks for listening. See you on the next episode. This is Psychedelics Today. I'm Joe Moore, joined by Sean McAllister of the McAllister Garfield Law Firm. Thanks for joining me, Sean.
Hey, Joe. Good to be here.
Great to have you. So you were a player with Decriminalize Denver. What kind of role did you play with that organization?
Well, it's funny. I was also, to step back a minute, I worked on cannabis legalization for 20 years now and was part of the efforts in 2005 to make cannabis the lowest law enforcement priority. And I had heard about this psilocybin initiative, and I wasn't clear what was going on with it. And all of a sudden they got the ballots, the signatures to get on the ballot. And so I reached out to the campaign and offered to help. And at that point, I just began consulting with the campaign about what they're doing. And sorry, my stepdaughter wants to say hi here. She's down. You mind leaving me alone for a minute? I'm on the air. So I started working with the campaign to help them with the messaging of the campaign and help them raising money and helping them begin to think about what it might look like if we win the election. And so, I don't want to take too much credit. I don't have a formal position in the campaign, but I have worked with them since January all the way up through the election. And I expect that now that the law has passed, that I'll be more active on their legal team to try to protect this victory going forward. But, Kevin Matthews and Cindy Sovine really deserve the lion's share of the credit, the two organizers of the Decriminalize Denver initiative. And, I'm also involved on behalf of Chacruna, a nonprofit that I work with. I'm on Chacruna's Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants. And Chacruna also endorsed the initiative and tried to do what it could to support the initiative and get the word out. And so I'm here today, more as an informal advisor to the campaign, but formally as a member of Chacruna's Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants. And we're really excited both about this initiative and what it means going forward for the U.S.
That's really excellent. So there's been a little bit of confusion around what this bill means. We've had, I want to say maybe 10 people reach out so far asking for us to give them guided mushroom sessions in Denver. We say no, because I think they misread what this vote really means. Could you explain what this really means legally?
I think that is critical. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding right now. The campaign was called Decriminalize Psilocybin, Decriminalize Denver. It wasn't called Legalize Psilocybin. It wasn't called Regulate Psilocybin. And we did that, and the campaign did that on purpose because the feeling was that the dialogue around this is in such its infancy that to just come right out of the gate and say we want to regulate and tax psilocybin and have stores and licenses to produce psilocybin, that was sort of too much too fast. And then we needed to have the dialogue with the community and begin with the thing that everybody agrees with, which is you should never be arrested for putting something in your body that grows naturally in nature. And so decriminalization really just means that Denver now has a lowest law enforcement priority around psilocybin. It doesn't mean it's legal in Denver. It doesn't mean it's regulated. It means that they're not supposed to arrest anybody for simple possession or cultivation for only personal possession amounts. So that's one thing people don't typically understand, is that this does not only decriminalize possession, but also cultivation for personal possession. And so decriminalization just means the city is not supposed to spend any money to criminalize this behavior. And that was sort of the second important part of the initiative, is decriminalize the possession and cultivation for personal possession amounts, and tell the city it can't spend any money to enforce laws against this. And so that is, what I love about that model is that it says to people, you can do this at home. You can produce it in your house. You can eat it at your house. You can have friends come over and eat it with you. But there's no ability to sell mushrooms, to charge for them. With cannabis, a lot of people who didn't want to get licensed stores went out and did things like, they said, if you buy my pipe, I'll give you this free marijuana. I think any of those kind of systems that people try to do, if you come to my breathwork ceremony, you get some free psilocybin, but you got to pay to come to the event. Any of those models suggest some kind of remuneration, which is the legal term for payment. They suggest some kind of payment for the mushrooms. And I think it's a really bad idea, because I do expect there to be some resistance to this at the city of Denver level. We can probably talk about that in a little bit here, but if you put an ad out and say, we're having breathwork ceremony with psilocybin, it's only $50, I guarantee you the city of Denver wouldn't like that. And it's just like with cannabis, before they legalized social clubs, people trying to have events where they would charge money for people to get in and give away free cannabis. The city came down on some of those behaviors as well. So I think it's really important to get the message out that this is really a bare minimum starting point for a larger discussion about potential legalization and regulation down the road. And again, I want to talk about what this means for Colorado down the road. But this is just a beginning that says you can possess or cultivate for personal possession, and that will only be the lowest law enforcement priority in the city and county of Denver. These things remain completely illegal at the state level and at the federal level. So again, you have to be very careful. It's not a time to break out the psilocybin dance party just yet. Well, at least not to charge for it. That's my. You can have a psilocybin dance party.
What kind of quantities are considered personal use, or is that flexible at this point?
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of this initiative, is it didn't set a specific amount cap on what personal possession is. I can tell you as a cannabis business attorney with a background in criminal law that the district attorneys and the police will look at personal possession amounts in sort of the typical ways that we think about it, an ounce or less, a couple weeks supply. If you have a pound of mushrooms, for example, there's absolutely an argument. You could say, hey, this is a year or 2 years supply or whatever it's going to be. I grew it once. I'm storing it in my freezer. It's a personal possession amount. And that could be true. And you would have an argument to avoid criminal prosecution. But, the cops and the DAs are going to look at this very narrowly. And I think about some of the cannabis cases I had where people would say, oh, this 5 pounds of marijuana was just, saving up for long-time personal use. And I literally saw police on the stand say, well, if you had 5 pounds of marijuana, you would have to smoke 10 joints a day for 2 years to use all that marijuana. And so if the quantity is really big enough, they're going to make arguments that you're not telling the truth, and this is really something you're trying to distribute psilocybin mushrooms. So I would be for consumers, I would be cautious and be thinking in terms of, a couple weeks supply or a month supply of, a couple grams at a time. And if you're getting up over an ounce, couple ounces, I would start to be, concerned that you could have some potential liability.
Yeah, absolutely. People really think it's wide open. It's really not. And caution is still very advised. Especially if people are like, oh, we're going to start up a warehouse grow. It's like, no, the feds are going to come in. The city police are going to come in. You're in trouble if you get caught with that. Big trouble.
Yeah, and I think I said that, but there's really no provision in this law that allows commercial production of psilocybin or any kind of commercial activity at all. And so anybody's thinking about a monetary connection to psilocybin needs to consult a lawyer, because it's probably illegal. There might be a way to do it. You and all your friends get together and you share psilocybin, but if people are paying money at the door to come in, you really could have a problem.
What do you think the city might do to push back on this a little bit?
Yeah, what's unfortunate is that the leaders in city government were all universally opposed to this initiative. I didn't hear one sitting city council person support this initiative. Certainly the mayor said he didn't support it. The district attorney in Denver didn't support the initiative. And, what's really unfortunate, and the reason we have to use ballot initiatives, are these politicians absolutely don't have the courage to stand up and fight the drug war and resist the temptation to do the easy thing and do the brave thing of support these initiatives. And so, with that as a background, I feel, the city should do the right thing and respect the will of the voters, but I feel very concerned that you're going to see institutional resistance to this law. And like I said a minute ago, in 2005, when we made cannabis prosecution the lowest priority in Denver, the city continued to prosecute cannabis cases. And we went to them, we said, well, what are you talking about? We just passed the lowest priority thing for cannabis, just like the psilocybin initiative, basically the same idea. We just passed this and you're still prosecuting marijuana people. What are you doing? And they said, well, sorry, it's still against state law, and we have a duty in the city and county of Denver to enforce state law. And so we actually litigated that issue with them in 2006. And unfortunately, the difference, or maybe fortunately, I guess, is when we made cannabis prosecution's lowest priority, we didn't have this other piece that the mushroom initiative has, which is we didn't have the piece saying you cannot spend any money on prosecution. So there's a difference now on the psilocybin case that, we can say, that's fine, it's still against state law, but the voters said you can't spend any money to prosecute psilocybin, so what are you doing? You can't do this. This might get a little too much in the weeds for your viewers, but it gets into really a complicated discussion about preemption, whether state laws against psilocybin preempt Denver laws, kind of like you hear about federal laws preempting state laws on marijuana. Are we going to see the city say, we have to follow state law and this provision is preempted by state law in some way? That I expect is where I said earlier, I think I will be doing a lot of work for the campaign on this legal front. We're already talking about meeting with the district attorney, meeting with the city attorney's office to try to gauge what they're doing on this topic. And if they come back with that kind of argument, I think you could see us in some litigation around whether this is preempted by state law. And, it's never been tested, this defunding provision. So it really will be a novel, new issue. And we're very hopeful that we don't have to do this. We're hopeful the city does the right thing. But if they don't, then I think you can expect a test case of some kind where we're arguing in front of a judge that, hey, you can't prosecute John Smith here. The city can't spend any money. And I don't know how that's going to come out. It will be very interesting. So I think, the one other thing I didn't mention about this campaign in response to this question is, so yes, we don't know what the city's going to do. We hope they'll follow the voters. But one of the things they have to do as part of this initiative is establish a review commission. And we're very hopeful that this review commission will ultimately be a vehicle that can make a recommendation or report about how the sky won't fall in Denver if psilocybin is decriminalized. And, what this commission is supposed to do is track the public safety impacts, track the use impacts, track the criminal justice impacts of this initiative. And, we have a lot of confidence, just like with cannabis, that psilocybin decriminalization will result in no change in public safety, no change in use rates, no change in underage youth use rates. Hard to say. And that's what happened with cannabis. You know, cannabis in Colorado, youth use rates remain below national average and have fallen. There's no indication that crime has increased, and no indication that addiction rates have increased. I mean, there's some nominal problems with cannabis legalization, more admissions to emergency rooms. Of course, the only side effect of cannabis is you get the munchies, but people have panicked on edibles and gone to emergency rooms. So no one would say any decriminalization or legalization effort is going to be without any impacts, but we believe very strongly this review commission will ultimately, when it gives its report, I think it's an annual report, is going to say really good things about nothing has changed in Denver and people are not, freaking out and, tripping in the streets. And so that's another important piece that I think once the city sees that, they will be less resistant to this. And I hope that will help guide decisions in the future and relax enforcement. And, the bigger thing is the impact of this on the state and ultimately the nation and what's going to happen in the coming years, because this is really a truly historic moment. Denver has led the entire United States as the first ever loosening of laws around psychedelics, and it is a leader on drug policy reform. And I think you can expect state initiatives here and in other states, and maybe we can talk about that in a minute, but that's how important this is. It's a truly historic victory, and all advocates for sensible drug policy should be thrilled.
Absolutely. I was in Boulder for a concert when we got the final count on Wednesday. It was really exciting. We got a lot of standing cheers, and it was cool.
That's awesome. So that's the other story around how this thing won, that it was behind until 1 a.m, the night of the election. And then the next morning we got word that the final count swung about 5,000 votes in our favor, and we won 50.5%. So quite amazing.
Awesome. That's great. I'm curious about pushback from the city council and the mayor. Like, did they have any kind of foundation that they were pushing back against on this?
The typical response was, well, we've just already legalized one controlled substance, marijuana in Colorado, and I think we need some more time before we can turn to something else. That was a typical response. Another was that we don't want Denver to become this, mecca of drug users or drug policy, and it sets a bad example, sort of a reputational argument that somehow, we'll be seen as a, hippie, pothead, tripping city, and that it'll hurt our reputation somehow. Yeah, this is what I said earlier. I mean, how is it that these politicians who had so little vision to even support cannabis legalization are supposed to be the ones telling us what is the impact on the city of Denver from legalizing or decriminalizing psilocybin? I mean, they really ought to question their judgment if they didn't have enough judgment to advocate for these things, and now they're telling us why they were bad. But, so that's, and I think, frankly, the reputational impact is that this gives Denver an amazing reputation, a reputation as a city that doesn't tolerate the drug war, that doesn't think people should be put in prison for what they put in their bodies, that believes in rational policy, that understands that there is no addiction capacity of psilocybin, that understands that there is no overdose amount of psilocybin, that understands that the FDA has given psilocybin breakthrough therapy status in the last couple of years for its ability to treat depression and end-of-life anxiety. This gives Denver a reputation of putting science over fear, because clearly the science is on our side. There are therapeutic uses of this. There are no addiction rate, no overdose amount. And, to me, it says something great about Denver. It doesn't put us in some bad light. And the people that worry about those kind of things, again, they didn't have the vision to support it. And they're the ones that have kept us in a drug war, that have criminalized millions of people and cost the country billions of dollars for 50 years. And we just have to stop listening to those kind of people. They're not leaders. It's very easy to say the status quo and criminalization is the answer. We have the burden as reformers to develop models of regulation and legalization that protect public safety, protect personal liberty to the maximum extent. I mean, that's really what all this is about. Is we need a system that addresses public safety concerns, but maintains as much personal liberty as possible on these topics, because that's really the solution. Those are the debates we should be having, and that's what Denver has spurred, is a debate about, okay, what's next? What does regulation look like? And so I'm excited to have that debate. I'm excited to really continue to unwind this horrible drug war that I think most people now see has been a terrible failure.
Big farce. Yeah. Do you have any idea on numbers over the last couple of years of like convictions that may possibly now, given the government upholding the citizens' will, might be diverted from the legal system?
The numbers are not huge. Cannabis arrests before legalization were, I think, 10 or 12,000 arrests a year in Colorado. So those numbers are really big. In contrast, I think you probably in the last few years in Colorado have had several hundreds of psilocybin prosecutions. And in Denver, they looked in the last 3 years, I think there's only been like 60 psilocybin prosecutions. That number really is interesting because on the one hand, it's like, if there's so few cases, then what are we doing with this stupid law anyways? On the other hand, I think even one arrest is too many. One person in prison is too many. And so this is the logic behind this initiative. It didn't matter if it was 200 arrests or 50. At the end of the day, one is too many. And what I'm proud of is there's other cities that are thinking about this kind of thing. And psilocybin is the most well-known after cannabis. I think, and what it's done is open the door for a debate about what about LSD, what about ayahuasca, what about peyote, what about some of the other psychedelics, MDMA and ibogaine and these other psychedelics, and what's really different about those? Why are we still criminalizing those? So there's some in the reform community that say we need to have initiatives that decriminalize all these things. But I think psilocybin was the most relatable. And if we had gone right to the voters with something that said, LSD, psilocybin, ayahuasca, it might have been too much. And so I think this was the right stepping stone to get the debate going. And I mean, this is a historic moment. We should all really be rejoicing that it's not a joke. People that advocate this are not some 10% minority of the society. We had a majority of voters in Denver say that psilocybin shouldn't be criminalized. And that shows that we're not a fringe movement. We're a majority movement. We really are. Those of us in the reform movement have to remember we are the majority. We just have to have our will expressed in policy. We've been shouted down by the minority for so long and shouted down by the fearmongers. But we have to come to terms with the fact we are the majority, and we really should be seeing our will expressed in public policy. So I'm excited.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, we have a collective trauma here around the drug war, and let's not forget that. We have been really abused. Lots of people have been really abused, and it's right. It's going to take baby steps. Like Nixon really did a number on this thing, and so did Reagan and others. So
yeah.
Can you talk about what's happening elsewhere? I think, are you involved in Oakland or another city?
Yeah, so Oakland is a city that we've talked to, the Chacruna. I believe I already mentioned I'm with Chacruna and the Council for the Protection of Sacred Plants. Chacruna is based in San Francisco, and it's headed by a Brazilian anthropologist who has studied ayahuasca and peyote use for 30 years now and published 20 books on it. And so given that the organization is based in San Francisco, we have a lot of ties in the Bay Area. And this is actually what I was just speaking about, which is Oakland is attempting to do what's called decriminalize nature. And so they're doing what I mentioned a minute ago, just a broad swath of decriminalization on all naturally occurring psychedelics. sometimes called entheogens. Here at Chacruna, we don't like to use the word entheogen. It's a little confusing to people, but naturally occurring psychedelic substances, peyote, ayahuasca, Sonoran desert toad, ibogaine, any of the naturally occurring forms of DMT, and so that's that's an initiative in Oakland that doesn't require voter approval. They're attempting to get the city council to just adopt that as a policy of the city. And so, whereas we had 170,000 voters to convince in Denver in this last election that voted out of 400,000 eligible voters, so low turnout, by the way. Remarkable to win in Denver with only 22% turnout. But whereas we had to convince all the voters in Oakland, they just have to convince 8 city council people. And I'm a little concerned they're going too far too quickly, but it's another lowest priority initiative that would say those substances are the lowest priority of Oakland. I don't think it has the defunding provision we've been talking about with Denver, so that's a weakness of the Oakland model. And then I do worry that, these other psychedelics are so esoteric and exotic for most people. A lot of people don't know what ayahuasca is, or they don't know what ibogaine is, and to put that in front of decision makers and ask them to decriminalize it all at once, it really requires you to do education on each of those substances, and that's a lot of work. But I commend them, and I actually have not. I spoke to them about a month and a half ago, and I'm not sure where they are with that right now. It certainly hasn't passed. I think this Denver initiative will help with their efforts, but that's the only other one that I know of right now that's happening. But as your viewers may know, California attempted to raise signatures to get a regulation of psilocybin, a ballot initiative on the ballot in advance, I think, of the 2018 election, and they failed to get enough signatures to get on the ballot. But California has begun attempting to get this on the ballot. And then you have Oregon, which is in the process of getting ballot signatures together to get an initiative on the ballot that would regulate psilocybin at the state level. And so, this is for 2020. Oregon looks like it's going to be the leader in statewide ballot initiatives here in 2020 because, and there's a lot of concern around the Oregon initiative, if you want me to talk about that now.
Sure.
The concern is it's a medicalized model, that what it says is that you can go to the state and apply to get a license to administer psilocybin and a license to cultivate and produce psilocybin. You don't have to be a licensed therapist in order to get that license to distribute psilocybin. But then you would basically have this unlicensed therapist administering psilocybin to quote unquote patients of some kind. And so, a lot of people have expressed concern that it's not a model that's purely medical, because anybody could get these licenses to distribute it, and you could see irresponsible behavior. And yet on the other side, people are concerned with the medicalization concept in general. I also fear a purely medicalized model, because just like with cannabis, back when it was medical marijuana was the only thing you could get, you really had to go to the doctor and say you were sick or say you were hurt. And if you were, or, had an argument there, they would give you a prescription. But so first of all, I think it facilitates a lot of scamming of the system with doctors and patients. But beyond that, if you look at pure medicalization, there are big pharma and private equity funds and big money out there looking at psychedelics saying, let's turn this into a pill that you can take for depression. And if you look at what happened with cannabis, the only legal prescribed cannabis was 2 of them. There's GW Pharma's dronabinol or Epidiolex, GW Pharma's Epidiolex, which is CBD. And then you also have dronabinol or Marinol, which is synthetic THC, which are FDA-approved drugs. I mean, these drugs cost people tens of thousands of dollars a year. And so the concern people have is when you turn something into a medicalized model only, you're going to eventually turn this over to big pharma. You're going to have a pill. It's going to cost tens of thousands of dollars a year, which is insane in a world where psilocybin has no overdose potential. It has no addiction potential. You can grow it in your house for a couple bucks, and to have to turn that over to big pharma. So Oregon has really got a lot of people excited and also concerned about the model. But my opinion is this is exactly the debate we need to be having. Should it be a medicalized model? Should it be a adult use tax and regulated model like cannabis? Should it just be the decriminalized model where you say it's not against the law, but you can't sell it and you can do what you want at your house? These are exactly the kind of discussions we should be having instead of deciding whether people should be going to jail for consuming a natural substance. And so, the Council for Protection of Sacred Plants and Chacruna is considering putting on what we're calling the Psychedelic Liberty Summit next spring in 2020 in the Bay Area, all designed to have this community and advocacy dialogue around what are the right regulatory regimes around psychedelics. Because we know Oregon is likely to make it to the ballot. And I don't want to speak for the Denver campaign, but I've heard Kevin Matthews, the director of the Denver campaign, say that he is definitely going to look at a statewide ballot initiative if Denver is successful. And so I, encourage you to talk to him and confirm whether or not that's actually going to happen. But I think what you'll see in 2020 is likely Oregon ballot initiative, but potentially Colorado ballot initiative, lots of local ballot initiatives. And you should see other states like California, Alaska, other true, libertarian or progressive states quickly following suit. I think you could see, a half dozen of these statewide initiatives in the next 6 or 7 years. And that's amazing. I mean, to come from being made fun of for 40 years, the legacy of Tim Leary and tune in, turn out, and drop out, to having what we really are experiencing is a psychedelic renaissance now. And it's one of the most exciting times to be alive. It's certainly a time to be proud to be a Coloradan, I'll tell you that much. This state, this little mountain state with 6 million people, has really rocked the world with its leadership on drug policy.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hope it spreads. And I'm really excited to see it progress and stuff. So
yeah.
Yeah, Sean, we're at about a half an hour. Anything else you want to point out? Maybe give your website?
Yeah, sure. Chacruna is chacruna.net, and Chacruna is spelled Chacruna, chacruna.net. Chacruna is the Quechua word for the ayahuasca leaf, and so that's why we're called Chacruna. We have a strong base in the ayahuasca and peyote background, but we advocate for all psychedelic legalization and decriminalization and any effort to take us away from a system of criminalization. And I think, like I said earlier, that's really what we need to be thinking about and doing now, is thinking about what a regulatory model might look like. I was worried if the Denver initiative failed, which it came close to, but luckily it won, that one of the reasons would be because voters didn't understand what this meant. Does this mean just anybody can have access to psilocybin? And sort of like your questions at the beginning, there's a lot of confusion as to what this means. And so, we need to start having this community dialogue about what is the right model. And Rick Doblin at MAPS talks about a license model for psychedelics. A personal license. And what that means is like a driver's license for psychedelics, that you would have to go somewhere, you get maybe some education, you pass a test, or they talk to you about setting and safety and efficacy and all the all the security issues and being a safe consumer of psychedelics. And then you get a license to use psychedelics, and you can maintain that license and have it and use it. Even cultivate for yourself, or maybe we get a regulated model where you can buy from stores. But if at some point you act irresponsibly, then you lose that license, or you have a probationary period. Some kind of system that suggests we're not just going to set you out there and let you go do whatever you want. If you show you can't be responsible with these substances, we might restrict your access to them. And I personally have a lot of interest, and I feel pretty good about that model as a potential to solve the problem that people feel like if you just decriminalize things, that there's no regulatory model. So we need to start having that dialogue. And, you know, I do think the critical thing right now for your viewers is that it's kind of like the questions you asked at the beginning. We have to be careful we don't ruin this victory with irresponsible behavior. And so that means, you know, don't go out there and throw pay-to-play psilocybin events, and don't, you know, go stand on the city and county building steps and consume mushrooms and be a fool in public. Keep doing what you're doing. Do it privately, do it discreetly, do it safely. Start talking to people. You know, one of the things that changed cannabis policy was essentially coming out of the closet, taking the example from the gay rights movement. You know, we have to stop being embarrassed or pretend that it's a bad thing that we're using psychedelic substances. I think there's nothing wrong with it. Used responsibly, it could be a part of a very healthy lifestyle. And we need to start reinforcing the culture of responsible psychedelic use. That's another reason why people are afraid, is we don't have traditions of, you know, in Mexico and South America, when indigenous people become a man, it's marked by the use of a psychedelic. Or when they decide to go to war, they take a psychedelic to make a decision as to what to do. I mean, these are actually parts of culture in many indigenous communities, where it's in the US, we try to talk about it like we're counterculture. But we're not actually counterculture. We are culture, and we need to not run from it. And we need to talk about fostering a culture that initiates people into this responsibly, that delays youth involvement with psychedelics until they're old enough to be responsible. And those are the kind of things people can do in their daily life, is just, you know, come out of the closet, be responsible, create a positive environment around this issue, and make it part of a healthy lifestyle that other people will not be afraid of. And so I think it's the best time in history to be in the U.S. and to be involved in psychedelics. It's never been better, and it's only going to get better from here. It'll be fascinating to see what happens. And we have to be careful. One last thing would be, the first ballot initiative that passes at a state level will set a model for all others. And that's why I think it's very important what these ballot initiatives look like. If we get a bad one out of the gate and it's a failed experiment, it could set back all the others. And so Oregon has that's why we're concerned about Oregon. Oregon has a lot of responsibility. And if Colorado goes to a statewide ballot, we'll have a lot of responsibility to avoid messing this up, because we have a unique opportunity here. But I know in the foreseeable future, the day's going to come when nobody goes to prison or jail for psychedelics, and there'll be some regulatory model around it. So, but that's an amazing development, and we should all be very proud.
Well, Sean McAllister, thanks a ton for joining us today on Psychedelics today, and for all your hard work. It's been great to watch you be part of it. It's been great to watch Decriminalize Denver, and just can't wait to see what's next, you know, and hopefully we can play a part as well.
Yeah, if people want to get a hold of me, you can look at my website, McAllisterGarfield.com, McAllister, Garfield, regular spelling. So McAllisterGarfield.com or Chacruna.net. And thanks to Psychedelic today for having me. It's great to be with you, and thanks for all your leadership and everything you're doing as well.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. And have a great rest of your day.
Okay, you too.